Under the searing sun of the desert, 90,000 human skulls were piled high. It was not hyperbole, it was architecture. Architecture fashioned from bone and rotting flesh, erected layer by painstaking layer at the gates of Baghdad. This was not the war you knew. It was not the territorial conquests of Alexander, nor the cold administration of Rome. This was pure terror, a mathematical statement written in blood. He was a limping man, dragging his right leg, missing 2 fingers on his left hand. His name was Timur. The world knew him as Tamerlane, or the Iron Lame, but no one dared utter that moniker to his face. By the time you finish this tale, you will understand why entire cities chose suicide rather than see his banner on the horizon. How did a crippled bandit from the Central Asian steppes manage to break the Ottomans? But before the skull pyramids, there was emptiness. We find ourselves in the latter half of the 10th century. The great Mongol Empire, the legacy of Genghis Khan, had fractured. It was a gargantuan corpse, being devoured by local warlords. In the Chagatai Khanate, in modern-day Uzbekistan, chaos reigned. There was no law. He was born into an insignificant noble family. As a youth, an arrow pierced his right leg, and another his right arm while attempting to steal sheep. The wounds never healed well. He was marked for life, lame, one-handed, in a steppe culture, where a man was valued by his ability to ride and shoot. He was a nobody. He should have died there. But he possessed something other warlords lacked: a venomous charisma. He knew he could not claim the title of Great Khan, for he lacked the royal blood of Genghis Khan. The laws were clear. Only descendants of Genghis Khan could rule. So what did Timur do? Accept his place? No. Hussein provided the lineage and the money. Timur was a military genius and a tactical butcher. They had saved each other's lives a dozen times, but power is a poison that refuses to share the chalice. By 1370, the tension between Timur and Hussein had become unbearable. Hussein wanted to rule from a palace of peace. Timur wanted perpetual war. The break was not diplomatic. It was a hunt. Timur cornered his former brother-in-law in the city of Balkh. Here, we see the first glimpse of Timur's depravity. Hussein surrendered under the promise that his blood would not be shed. Timur, with a cold smile, kept his word. Technically, he had ordered his men not to use swords. Instead, they suffocated Hussein and stomped his body until his bones turned to dust. But the problem of his impure blood remained. He needed legitimacy, so he did what any brilliant usurper would. He married Hussein's widow, a princess of the Chinggisid line. Now, he was technically the imperial son-in-law. He did not sit on the throne. He placed a puppet descendant of Genghis Khan on the throne and sat at his feet, ruling from the shadows as an emir, a theatrical farce everyone knew but no one dared to question. Samarkand became his jewel. Timur vowed to make it the capital of the world. And for that, he needed artisans, architects, scholars, and theologians. But he wasn't going to hire them. He was going to steal them. He began a 35-year campaign that did not cease until his dying breath. His first true victim was not a city, it was an idea. The idea that the Golden Horde, ruler of Russia and the northern steppes, was untouchable. Tokhtamesh, the leader of the Golden Horde, was a protege of Timur. Timur had saved him, fed him, and helped him seize the throne of the White Horde. They were allies. Tokhtamesh called Timur father. But in 1382, Tokhtamesh made a fatal mistake, believing the old lame man was weakening. Tokhtamesh sacked Moscow and, drunk with power, turned his gaze south to the lands of his father, Timur. He attacked Tver, insulted Timur's ambassadors. Timur's response was not immediate. It was methodical. Timur assembled his host. This was not a disorganized horde. This was a professional machine, paid for by the spoils of previous wars. Disciplined to the death, they had siege engineers, heavy infantry units, and the deadliest horse archers in the world. Timur looked north, towards the frozen steppes of Russia. Tokhtamesh wants war. He told his generals, "We will give him something worse. We will give him oblivion." The chase began. Timur led 100,000 men through deserts and steppes where there was neither food nor water. They hunted the Golden Horde's army like wolves pursuing a wounded deer. But Tokhtamesh kept running, leading Timur deeper and deeper into the northern cold, betting that winter would kill Timur's army before a single arrow was loosed. It was a deadly trap. Supplies dwindled. Timur's soldiers began to eye their horses with hunger. The cold froze the blood in their veins. They were thousands of miles from home, lost in a white void. Turning back was impossible. It would have shown weakness. Pushing forward was logical suicide. Timur ordered a massive hunt, but not for men, for wild game to feed his troops. He did something no one expected. Instead of forming his army in a column, he spread it out for miles. The two armies met in a bloody battle that lasted 3 days. 100,000 warriors against 100,000. At a critical moment, when Timur's flank was about to fall, the lame commander dismounted, took an axe, and stood in the front lines. The sight of the emir, this old fighter, fighting like a demon, ignited his army with unyielding fury. The Golden Horde was not just defeated, it was wiped off the face of the earth. Timur did not just claim victory. He set fire to the Golden Horde's capital, Sarai, diverting a river to permanently deprive the place of life. Toktamish fled into the Siberian forests, becoming a king without a kingdom, haunted by the shadow of the man he betrayed. Timur, meanwhile, returned to Samarkand, laden with gold and slaves. Yet, victory in the north brought him no peace, only a new appetite. He had tasted the blood of an entire empire and craved more. His gaze turned westward. Persia was fractured, wealthy, and weak, a ripe fruit, ready to be plucked. But Persia would not go down without a fight, and the city of Isfahan would teach Timur a lesson in stubbornness, a lesson Timur answered with a brutality that would forever define his legacy. Isfahan made the mistake of treating Timur as just another conqueror, one with whom it could negotiate. In 1387, this wealthy Persian city surrendered without a fight. Timur accepted their submission, left garrisons of tax collectors, and continued his campaign. It seemed like a standard deal: pay and live. But one night, a spark of rebellion ignited in the city. A blacksmith struck a drum, a mob gathered, and in a fit of patriotic fury, the people of Isfahan slaughtered the 3,000 soldiers and collectors Timur had left behind. It was a victory of a minute, an euphoric celebration that became the most brutal death sentence in medieval history. Timur turned back. He was not angry. He was frustrated by inefficiency. As his army reached the walls of Isfahan, the city tried to surrender again. This time, Timur accepted neither keys nor gold. He needed to teach a lesson that would echo through the ages. He gathered his commanders and gave them a cold, bureaucratic order. Every soldier in the army, without exception, must bring him a quota of 2 human heads. Not the heads of enemy soldiers, but the heads of civilians. Men, women, old, young, it did not matter. If a soldier failed to present 2 heads by the end of the day, he forfeited his own. Panic gripped Timur's own troops. Many did not want to kill innocents, but the fear of the emir was stronger than their conscience. The chroniclers, snorts, say that initially, soldiers bought heads from more sadistic comrades to meet their quota. The price of a human head rose and fell in a gruesome market within the camp. Eventually, this market of death stabilized. 70,000 people were summarily beheaded, but Timur did not leave the bodies to rot haphazardly. He was an empire builder. He ordered the skulls piled high, cemented with mortar and brick. 28 giant pyramids were erected around the city, towers of white bone, staring into the void with empty sockets. Isfahan was not plundered. It was spiritually erased. The message was clear. Rebellion is futile. Mercy is weakness. I am Clear's throat, the scourge of God. With Persia subdued under the weight of terror, Timur, already in his 60s, might have considered rest. He had riches, he had an empire, he had heirs. But Timur's mind did not seek peace. It sought eternal glory. He looked east, towards India. His generals hesitated. India, they whispered. The mountains are impassable, the jungles deadly, and the Delhi sultans have weapons against which we are powerless. War elephants. Timur looked at them with contempt. Are we the heirs of Genghis Khan or cowardly old women? His justification for the invasion was religious. He claimed the Muslim sultans of Delhi were too tolerant of their Hindu subjects, and therefore, they needed correction. It was a pious lie, masking a simple truth. Delhi held more gold than any other city on earth. The Indian campaign of 1,398 became a logistical nightmare. They crossed the Hindu Kush in winter, There were stretches where the gorges were so deep Timur ordered his men to slide down the snow, sitting on their shields like bobsleds, while lowering horses with ropes and pulleys. When they finally descended onto the Indian plains, Timur faced a problem he had not anticipated. It wasn't the elephants yet, it was the prisoners. On his way to Delhi, he had captured 100,000 people, 100,000 mouths to feed, 100,000 souls who, as the Delhi Liberation Army approached, began to show signs of hope and rebellion. Timur was in his tent on the eve of a great battle. He knew he could not guard 100,000 prisoners and fight the Sultan simultaneously. If the prisoners rebelled mid-battle, he would be attacked from two sides. Timur's solution, once again, was dictated by cold, impartial arithmetic logic. He gave his officers the order, "Kill them all. Every last one, gentlemen, all of them." And so, in 1 hour, a true massacre unfolded. 100,000 Hindus were put to the sword right in the camp, awaiting liberation. The river ran red before the real battle had even begun. Timur ensured there were no enemies left behind him. Now, only Delhi and its beasts remained. Sultan Mahmud Tughlaq met him with 120 war elephants. These were not mere animals, they were living tanks. Their tusks were coated in poison and steel. On their backs sat towers of archers, and they were trained to trample and toss men into the air. Steppe horses, having never seen elephants, panicked at their mere scent. Timur's cavalry, the deadliest force in the world, was paralyzed, attempting to attack a 5-ton wall of flesh. But Timur did not falter. He smiled. He had anticipated this. He ordered his baggage camels brought forth. They were loaded with dry straw, wood, and oil, tied in a line, and positioned in front of his troops. As the elephants charged, shaking the earth, Timur gave the order, "Fire!" The camels were ignited and driven forward, screaming in pain and terror. They became living fireballs, hurtling directly at the elephants. The result was utter chaos. The elephants, terrified by the flames and the horrific screams, turned and charged into their own lines, crushing the Sultan's infantry and shattering their formations. Delhi's primary weapon turned against them. Timur threw his cavalry through the smoking remains of the Indian army. It was a total slaughter. The entrance into Delhi was not a conquest, it was an apocalypse. The city was looted for days. Timur's soldiers, drunk on blood and greed, burned so fiercely that smoke blotted out the sun. They took caravans of gold, precious gems, and, most importantly, every living artisan and stonemason. Timur wanted them to build a mosque in Samarkand that would surpass anything seen in India. Delhi was so devastated that chroniclers claim there was no government, no laws, no organized life in the city for a century, only ruins and ghosts. Timur returned to Samarkand as the richest man on earth. He had humbled Russia, Persia, and India. Anyone might have thought that was enough, but in the West, a new power was rising, an arrogant force calling itself the new Roman Empire. The Ottomans, Sultan Bayezid, nicknamed the Thunderbolt, had just crushed a European crusade at Nicopolis. He felt invincible. He sent letters to Timur, calling him an old dog and a crow. He boasted he would take his wives as concubines. No one insulted Timur and lived to tell of it. The clash of the two most powerful monarchs of Islam was inevitable. This was not just a war for territory. It was a duel of colossal egos. Two alpha predators, locked in a single cage called Asia Minor, and only one would emerge alive. Bayezid the Thunderbolt made the classic mistake of the powerful. He believed his own legend. He had defeated the knights of France and Hungary. He saw himself as Islam's sword in Europe. To him, Timur was merely a lucky bandit, a relic of a Mongol past. The letters they exchanged are legendary for their venom. Bayezid wrote, "Your army is a horde of thieves. If you dare to come, I shall make your wives serve me as wine-bearers." Timur read the letter in silence. He did not yell. He did not tear the paper. He simply looked at the messenger and said, "The son of Osman is mad. I will have to cure him." In the summer of 1402, Timur's war machine entered Anatolia. Bayezid, overconfident, moved east and took up a position in hilly, fox-like terrain, ideal for his infantry and deadly for Timur's horses. He waited, confident the old lame man would fall into his trap. But Timur did not play by others' rules. His scouts saw Bayezid's position and laughed. Instead of attacking head-on, Timur's army, 140,000 strong, made a massive pivot south. They completely ignored the Ottoman army and passed behind their lines, burning crops and poisoning wells along the way. Suddenly, alarming news began to reach Bayezid's tent. Timur was not in front of him, he was behind him. He was besieging Ankara, a key city in his rear. Bayezid panicked. His defensive strategy was useless. Now, he had to attack. In a fury, he ordered his army to turn around and march at an accelerated pace towards Ankara under the searing July sun. It was a death march. Ottoman soldiers, weighed down by heavy armor, ran for days without sufficient water. When they finally reached the Chubuk plain, outside Ankara, they were exhausted, dehydrated, and at the brink of collapse, and what they saw broke their fighting spirit. Timur was not only waiting for them, but he was also rested. His troops occupied the high ground, but the main blow was not military, but hydrological. Timur had diverted the small stream that supplied the plain. The only source of water was in Timur's hands. The Ottomans fought not for victory, but for a sip of water. The Battle of Ankara raged with a roar that shook all of Asia Minor. Bayezid sent his Tipler, elite cavalry, in desperate attempts to break through the center. But Timur had a trump card, prepared months in advance through golden spies operating on Bayezid's right flank. And as the Black Horde Tatar mercenaries, steppe warriors, racial and cultural kin to Timur's men, at the moment the Ottoman push gained full momentum. 18,000 Tatars stopped their horses, turned, and charged against their own employer. Bayezid's flank collapsed, turning into utter chaos. Bayezid's Serbian warriors, his most loyal vassals, fought like demons, trying to protect the Sultan, begging him to flee while there was still time. "Lord," they cried, "the battle is lost. Save your head to save the state." But the thunderbolt was too proud to flee. He retreated to a hill with his janissaries, his personal guard, and fought with an axe for hours, surrounded by a sea of enemies. They fell one by one until the Sultan, bloodied and dusty, stumbled when his horse was struck by an arrow. The net descended upon him. The man who had terrorized Europe was now chained at the feet of the lame conqueror. Legend has it that as Bayezid was brought in chains to Timur's tent, the emir was playing chess with his son. Timur looked up, saw the one-eyed sultan. Bayezid had lost an eye in a previous battle and burst out laughing. Bayezid, insulted, cried, "You laugh at my misfortune. God punishes the arrogant." Timur shook his head, wiping tears of laughter. "I do not laugh at you, Bayezid. I laugh at how little God cares for this world, that he has entrusted it to the hands of a lame and one-eyed man." Bayezid's fate proved worse than death, public humiliation. They say, though historians debate the details, that Timur imprisoned him in an iron cage. He carted him everywhere as a trophy. At banquets, Timur used the back of the chained sultan as a footrest to mount his horse. His wife, the Serbian princess Olivera, was forced to serve wine, semi-naked, to her captors, ironically fulfilling a threat once made by Bayezid himself. Within months, Bayezid died in captivity. Some say of apoplexy, others that he smashed his head against the bars of his cage, unable to bear the shame. With the Ottoman Empire decapitated and plunged into a civil war that lasted 10 years, Europe, unknowingly, breathed a sigh of relief. Timur had saved Western Christendom, delaying the fall of Constantinople by half a century. But Timur cared little for Europe. To him, the West was already history. His gaze, that restless, never-sleeping eye, turned to his last great goal, the last dream of every Mongol conqueror, China. China, the dragon, the tomb of his ancestors. For Timur, the invasion of China was not a territorial ambition, it was a spiritual obligation. The Ming dynasty had driven the Mongols from the Beijing throne 30 years prior. They had humiliated the legacy of Genghis Khan. And, worst of all, Chinese envoys had arrived in Samarkand, addressing Timur as a vassal, demanding tribute. Timur, the man who used sultans as footstools, did not pay tribute. He collected it in blood. It was the winter of 1404. Timur was 68 years old. He was blind in one eye, could barely walk without assistance, and his body was riddled with ancient scars. His physicians begged him, "Wait for spring, great emir. The steppes are frozen. The army will perish before reaching the Great Wall." Timur ignored them. "Summer is for the weak," he said. "We march now." He assembled 200,000 men. This was the largest military mobilization Central Asia had ever seen. They carried not only swords, but seeds to plant crops along the way. They led thousands of dairy cows to feed the troops. They transported carts of captured Chinese engineers to demolish fortifications of their own homeland. The campaign was a war against nature. The winter that year was one of the harshest in history. The wind howled so fiercely it peeled skin from faces. Men froze in their saddles, but the fear of Timur was hotter than any fire. No one deserted. They preferred to meet the snow than the wrath of the lame one. They reached the border city of Otrar, on the banks of the Seer River, which was completely frozen over with a meter of ice. There, the invincible conqueror met an enemy he could not behead. While outside, the temperature plummeted to 30 degrees below zero. Inside his silk tent, Timur's body burned like a furnace. He tried to treat himself his way, drinking icy alcohol and applying ice to his chest to break the fever. It was useless. The body that had survived arrows, swords, and falls from horses finally said, "Enough." For 3 days he raved. He shouted orders to generals who were not there. He spoke of burning Beijing. His consorts and generals surrounded him, listening as the breath of the man who had annihilated 5% of the Earth's population grew hoarse and shallow. On the 19th of February 1405, Timur stopped breathing. The silence that followed was far more terrifying than his screams. The army, a monster with 200,000 heads, was suddenly leaderless. The invasion of China was instantly called off. No one had the will to continue without him. His body was secretly transported back to Samarkand. It was embalmed with camphor and musk and placed in an ebony coffin. He was buried in the Guri Amir, the mausoleum he had built for his favorite grandson. On his tomb, they placed the world's largest dark green jade stone, and on this stone, 2 warnings were carved. First, a false genealogy, linking him to Genghis Khan. Second, a curse that was meant to echo through the ages as a hidden threat. When I arise from the dead, the world will tremble. And below, another inscription, in Arabic. He who disturbs my tomb. Unlion and more than the inhabitants of Samarkand read the stone and lowered their gaze, fearing that the old lame man could fulfill his promise even from hell. For 500 years, the tomb remained sealed. Empires fell, borders shifted, and Timur became legend. Until the 20th century, when someone decided a curse was merely the superstition of ignorant men. Someone decided to open the tomb. It is 1941. I want to look him in the eye. The mission falls to Mikhail Gerasimov, a brilliant and eccentric forensic anthropologist, known for being able to reconstruct a man's face simply by touching his skull. Along with a Soviet scientific expedition, he arrives in Samarkand in June. The heat is unbearable. The city is nervous about the Soviet scientists, atheists, and rationalists. The tomb is to them merely an archaeological object. Stone, bone, dust. They don't believe in ghosts. They don't believe in curses. But the locals, Clear's throat, do. As Soviet trucks unload generators and spotlights around the Guri Amir mausoleum, the elders of the city approach the dig site. A scene unfolds as if taken from a horror film, but it is documented in the diaries of the expedition operators themselves. 3 elders, white-bearded and in traditional garb, ask to speak to the expedition leader. They show him an ancient book written in Farsi. They point to a line and read aloud. He who opens my tomb, unleash an invader more terrible than I. The scientists laugh. A curse. We live in the 20th century. Comrades, superstition is the opium of the people. They wave away the elders. They continue to set up winches, but the atmosphere changes. Workers complain of sudden headaches. Electric lights powered by diesel generators flicker and die without mechanical cause. The air inside the mausoleum becomes heavy, tense, difficult to breathe. It is the 19th of June, 1941. Gerasimov gives the order. They begin to hoist the massive dark green jade slab. The stone groans as it slides, and at that moment, a smell fills the room. It is not the smell of decay. Witnesses describe it as a penetrating and intoxicating aroma of oils, camphor, resins, and spices. They say it was Timur's breath. Beneath the slab, they find an ebony coffin. They open it, and there lies a skeleton. Gerasimov leans in, captivated, ignoring the fear of the local workers. He immediately begins his examination, and the story is confirmed bone by bone. The right leg is shorter and deformed. The right hand bears damage described by chroniclers 500 years ago. There is no doubt. It is him. Gerasimov picks up Timur's skull. He holds it up triumphantly under the flickering spotlights and fulfills Stalin's order. Science has conquered myth. That night, the scientists celebrate in the hotel, toasting with vodka, euphoric from the archaeological discovery of the century. They go to sleep, drunk with success. On the night of June 21st, the next morning, the 22nd of June 1941, telephones begin to ring in the hotel. But it is not congratulations from Moscow. It is screams of panic. At 4 a.m., 1,000 kilometers to the west, the curse has materialized. Adolf Hitler has launched Operation Barbarossa. 3 million German soldiers, the largest invasion force in human history, have crossed the Soviet border. The Luftwaffe is bombing Russian cities, turning them to dust. It is an invasion of such scale and brutality that Timur's campaigns seem like minor skirmishes. An invader more terrible than I. The news reaches Samarkand like a physical blow. The scientists stare at Timur's skull, now lying on a laboratory table with an eternal mocking grin. Fear turns to pure terror. It is irrational, but it is visceral. They have unleashed something. The war on the Eastern Front becomes a bloodbath. The Nazis advance on Moscow with terrifying speed. Stalin is paralyzed. The Red Army is collapsing. It seems like the end of Russia. Legend has it that Gerasimov and the other expedition members, in horror, tried to undo their mistake. They make Herculean efforts to contact Stalin or his generals. The story echoes through the corridors of the Kremlin. We must return him. We must close the tomb. For months, as the Nazis advance on Stalingrad, Timur's skeleton travels in a box, far from its resting place. And the war worsens with each passing day. Finally, in a moment of desperation, Stalin, a staunch atheist, relents and orders the remains returned with full Islamic honors, not as a museum exhibit, but as the remains of a king. Soon, a plane carries Timur's remains. They fly over the front lines at Stalingrad, as if the spirit of the conqueror might inspire the troops or terrify the enemy. And then the plane turns south, towards Bekstan. The fate of the greatest war in history seemed to hang by a thread, and that thread was tied to a coffin lid in Central Asia. Timur's remains return home. Amidst the bloodiest war of modern times, a solemn convoy traverses the Uzbek steppes. They carry no ammunition or food. They carry a skeleton. They arrive in Samarkand and with almost religious haste, return Timur to his crypt. Imams recite prayers, interrupted a year prior. They once again place the heavy dark green jade slab over the black opening. They seal the tomb, returning the genie to its bottle, and then the impossible happens. Within days of the tomb's sealing, the weather on the Eastern Front changes, but more importantly, the Red Army launches Operation Uranus. It is a crushing counterattack at Stalingrad. Field Marshal Paulus, who had never lost, surrenders. It becomes the turning point of World War II. And they are right. But ask the elders of Samarkand. Ask them if they believe in coincidence. They will tell you with chilling certainty that the war was not won by communism. It was won by allowing the dragon to sleep again. But let us leave superstition and return to the man. If we look behind the mountain of skulls, we see something even more disturbing. Timur was not a bloodthirsty psychopath in the clinical sense. He did not kill because he enjoyed it, though he did not dislike it. He killed because it was efficient. He understood something about human nature that modern dictators still study. Terror is an economy. If you besiege a city and fight street by street, you lose time, you lose men, and you lose money. But if you take the first city, kill everyone, build a tower of their heads, and let the survivors run to the next city to tell the story, the next city does not resist. They open the gates. They give you gold. They give you food. Timur's brutality was a tool of energy conservation. He destroyed Baghdad, Damascus, Isfahan. He erased the greatest cultural centers of Asia from the map. Clears throat. But here is the paradox, the part that doesn't fit the barbarian puzzle. Every time he plundered a city, he had a strict order to kill the soldiers. Rape the women if you want, but do not touch the artisans, the stonemasons, the silk weavers, the glassblowers, the mathematicians. Astronomers were separated from the condemned masses and sent in chains to Samarkand. Timur was building his own paradise. He wanted his capital to be the most beautiful city man had ever seen. The Bibi Khanim Mosque is a perfect example of his megalomania. Timur ordered it built after his Indian campaign. He wanted it so large that when people saw it, they would feel like ants. He brought 95 elephants from India just to haul the stones. The architects told him, "Amir, the dome is too large. Physics does not allow it. It will collapse." Timur replied, "If it collapses, your heads will adorn the foundation." But the architects were right. Within a few years, bricks began to fall on worshippers during prayer. Timur's ambitions were greater than the laws of gravity. This duality makes him fascinating. He could spend all day debating theology with the greatest Islamic scholars, displaying a deep knowledge of the Quran, and that same night, order 4,000 Armenian prisoners buried alive because they were too noisy. He was a chess player. Literally. Regular chess seemed too simple, too boring for Timur. He invented his own variant. Timur's chess, a larger board, 112 squares instead of 64, and additional pieces like camels, giraffes, and war machines. To him, the real world was no different from this board. His generals, his sons, his enemies, the cities he burned were merely wooden pieces, pawns sacrificed to capture the king. There was no morality in his moves, only strategy. But even the best chess player eventually runs out of moves. Timur spent his life in motion. He never ruled from a throne. He ruled from a saddle. 35 years of continuous campaigns. He never slept in the same city for more than a few months. He was running from something. Perhaps he was fleeing the realization that despite all his power, his empire was built on fear, and fear evaporates once the monster dies. He was convinced his sons were not like him. They were soft. They had grown up in lavish palaces, sipping wine and reading poetry, instead of starving in the steppe and stealing sheep. And so we return to that winter of 1405, on the way to China. The old lame man dies, and in his final moments, he does not ask for forgiveness. He does not repent the skull pyramids or the rivers of blood. His last concern is logistics. He looks at his generals, burly men weeping like children, and tells them, "Do not cry." Even in the face of death, he tried to deceive the world one last time. He wanted to remain an unseen terror, but it did not work. The news leaked, the empire froze, and the great question that had hung over Asia for 3 decades finally received its answer. What happens when gravity disappears? Everything flies and then everything collapses. Timur's body returned to Samarkand amidst a snowstorm, but the real storm raged within the palace. Timur had meticulously planned every battle, every siege, and every massacre with mathematical precision, but he made the fatal mistake of all tyrants. He believed his will would outlive his pulse. He named his grandson Pir Muhammad as heir, but Pir Muhammad was far away in Afghanistan, and in the vacuum of power, loyalty becomes the first casualty. Within weeks, the largest empire on earth turned into a den of wolves. His sons and grandsons had no time to mourn the patriarch. They tore at each other's throats. Khalil Sultan, another grandson, seized Samarkand and emptied the royal treasury to buy troop loyalty. Miran Shah, Timur's mad son, a man believed to have struck his head during a fall from a horse and suffered from bouts of psychotic violence, claimed his rights to the west. The map shattered into fragments. Provinces Timur had held in terror for decades saw their chance. In Baghdad, in Damascus, in Delhi, survivors rose from the ruins and killed Timur's governors. The fear dissipated. The blood empire bled out, but out of this chaos emerged an unlikely figure. He was not a fearless warrior like Timur. He was his youngest son, Shah Rukh. Shah Rukh looked at his father's legacy, mountains of skulls, scorched earth, and decided to go the opposite path. He defeated his nephews and brothers not to continue perpetual war, but to end it. He moved the capital to Herat in Afghanistan, and there, a fascinating schizophrenic transformation occurred. The same people who years earlier had piled heads in Isfahan now competed to sponsor the finest miniaturists. Generals who had burned libraries in Damascus now paid fortunes for rare manuscripts. Thus was born the Timurid Renaissance. It was a desperate attempt to wash away blood with ink. The ultimate expression of this contradiction was Timur's grandson, Ulugh Beg. Ulugh Beg ruled Samarkand, but he had no interest in conquering China or India. He was interested in the stars. While his grandfather looked at maps to destroy cities, Ulugh Beg looked at the sky to understand the universe. He built a massive observatory, a stone sextant 40 meters high, sunk into the ground. He calculated the length of the solar year with an accuracy that modern computers only slightly correct to the second. He mapped 18 stars, turning Samarkand into the scientific center of the world. The curse of Bayezid seemed to be lifted. The dynasty seemed to have found peace in science, but Timur's blood does not dilute so easily. Religious conservatives did not like a king who looked more at the sky than at the Quran. And Ulugh Beg's own son, an impatient and radical young man named Abd al-Latif, saw his father's weakness. "My father studied the stars while enemies sharpened their swords," he said. Conflict erupted in 1449. It was not a war between nations. It was a Greek tragedy in the Asian steppes. Father against son, astronomer against aspiring tyrant. Ulugh Beg was defeated, captured. He surrendered, hoping for mercy, hoping that the bloodshed would save him. He asked for permission to make a pilgrimage to Mecca and withdraw from public life. His son granted the request. Ulugh Beg left Samarkand, a beaten philosopher king, but he had barely left the city when a rider caught up to him. He did not bring a farewell message. The rider, acting on his son's orders, made Ulugh Beg dismount in a roadside ditch. The grandson of the man who had terrorized the world was beheaded like a common criminal. This episode sealed the dynasty's fate. Abd al-Latif, the son of the murderer, did not last long. He was killed by his own soldiers 6 months later. The Central Empire crumbled into dust. Black sheep and white sheep Turkmen ravaged the west. The northern Uzbeks descended to claim the south. What Timur had built with such terror crumbled in less than a century. But amidst the ruins, a young Timurid prince, fleeing the ruins of his lineage, turned his gaze southeast, towards India, a land his ancestor had plundered but never fully conquered. His name was Babur. He had no army, no throne, no means. The only thing he possessed was the glorious name of Timur and a desperate ambition. He was to found the Mughal Empire and once again change the course of human history, but that is another story entirely. For Timur, however, it was the absolute end. His erected pyramids of skulls turned to dust. The cities he conquered were rebuilt. His grand empire vanished. Only one thing remained, the legend. And that unanswered question that his earthly journey left us. The question that arises whenever a powerful man promises order in exchange for freedom. Look at the tomb once more, under the blue dome of Samarkand. In the cool silence of the mausoleum rests the man responsible for the deaths of 5% of the world's population in his time. 17 million people. If this number were translated to the modern population, it would be equivalent to killing 400 million souls. Imagine the silence he left behind. Imagine entire regions of Asia where no dog barked, no child cried, no rooster crowed, only the wind whistling through the empty eye sockets of skulls. In this lies his true legacy. Unlike Genghis Khan, who left behind a code of laws, the Yasa, that governed his empire long after his death, Timur left no laws, no institutions, no inefficient bureaucracy. Only the fear of his name remained. And fear, however potent, has an expiration date. He was a barren conqueror, a hurricane in human form. His tragedy, like the tragedy of the millions who perished by his sword, was that it was all a display of vanity. He sought to be immortalized as the Lord of Conjunction, the ruler of auspicious planets. He desired the world to know that a man rejected by his own tribe could make the very universe kneel. He achieved this, but at the cost of the destructive demise of medieval Islamic civilization. By destroying the Golden Horde, he paved the way for Russia to become an empire. By crushing the Ottomans, he gifted Europe an additional 50 years to prepare for its resurgence. By sacking Delhi, he broke India's back for a century. Timur changed the world not by what he created, but by what he irrevocably destroyed. And to this day, the dark green jade slab remains. It is dark, almost black, heavy as sin itself. They say if you get close enough, you can feel the cold emanating from it. It is not the cold of stone, but the chill of a will that recognized no boundaries. History taught us to fear rampaging monsters, screaming barbarians. But Timur taught us a darker, more important lesson. True horror is not chaos. True horror is absolute order, imposed by one man. True horror is a pyramid of 70,000 heads built with architectural blueprints and quality mortar. Timur rests in darkness. The empire is gone. His descendants are dead. The bone pyramids have turned to dust, but the warning carved on his tomb still holds. It is not a mystical threat of ghosts or world wars. It is an eternal reminder to anyone who passes by and looks at the stone. Here lies a conqueror, the inscription whispers, but the steppe wind, the same wind that blew over his victims and his palaces, answers with the only truth that matters in the end, the only truth that even Timur could not behead. Every empire born in blood drowns in blood, and in the end, dust always wins.